Hi everyone, welcome back to Musician Coffee House. This is your host named Grace. Today in this episode is going to be a little bit different because our guest speaker is a music therapist. So normally I invite other music artists, but today because I am a music therapist, I thought it'd be so cool to, let my other music therapy colleagues to hop on here and tell about their music journey, because in the end, like, they are musicians too, not just only music therapists. So today we have Erin, and is one of the most inspirational music therapists that I looked up to since college. I believe that I saw like a YouTube video of Erin of doing a TED Talk. Today, Erin will be sharing a glimpse of how that came about and her journey as a music therapist, her philosophy, and her amazing work. Erin, welcome. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm great. How are you?
Good, good. So if you can give us an introduction of yourself, that would be really great.
Sure. Well, my name is Erin Seibert. I am a music therapist, like Grace said, working in a medical facility. I've been a music therapist for 9 years now, and I've kind of worked in a few different populations and settings, but they all kind of settle around medical music therapy. And I never know what else to say about myself, but that is my music therapy self identity right there.
Yeah, and you also went to Berkeley for grad school, right?
I did, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Got my master's degree in music therapy from Berkeley.
Awesome. All right, so we're both Berkeley alumni, except I graduated there undergrad, but still, go Jazz Cats.
Yes. Well, I didn't even know that was their mascot, let alone they
Oh,
have a
really?
mascot.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It was honestly kind of lame. It was just like a black cat with a Berkeley t-shirt. Yeah,
Oh, well,
that
you
was
gotta have your mascot,
it.
and yeah, I don't think Berkeley has recreational sports in the same way as other universities, so that probably makes sense.
Yeah, if we ever wanted to be involved in sports, I think some of our students would go to MIT or BU, BC and join in their teams.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but for us, we had ensembles group, so that was
Yes.
pretty cool. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so if you could you tell us about how you found music therapy, and if that was your, you know, calling in the mission, like in the past, or did it ever change, shift, or whatsoever?
Absolutely. So I grew up studying classical music, both voice and piano. So I was a musician very early on in my life. When I was in high school, I was very involved in so many aspects of music. And when it came time to kind of figure out what I wanted to do with my life and like what I wanted to study, go to college, all of that, I thought to myself, like, wow, it'd be really great if I could use music to help other people.
Mm.
And so every time I received like a college brochure in the mail, I would like look at I always went straight to music degrees. And I don't know why I ever expected anything to be different. Like I knew that there'd be music education and music performance, music theory, but I just always continued to look until one day I saw music therapy listed. And I was like, yep, that's it. That's what I want to do. I had
Mm.
no idea what it was, what it entailed or anything, but to me, that was exactly what I was looking for when I thought to myself, I want to use music to help other people. So the rest is history. I like applied to my undergrad university and like with the intentions of going in to study music therapy, and I never turned back.
Wow, that's awesome. And were your parents supportive of you going into the music industry?
Yeah, I think they were always very supportive of my musicianship and like studying music, and I think it was very evident to them that that was like where my passion lay. It's very lucky to have like my entire family were musicians,
Oh, wow.
and my grandfather was in music education for about 50 years.
Wow.
So even though my family didn't understand what music therapy was, they were willing to like figure it out with me.
Oh wow. So what do they think about it now?
I think, they're very supportive and they
Mm-hmm.
always are interested to kind of like hear more like what my day to day looks like. I always like share anecdotes and stories with them when I can.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be interested to know like what they think my day to day looks like, because even though many people in my life who I'm close to understand what I do, they understand like logically, or they kind of like have a picture in their mind. There's so much of my job that
Mm-hmm.
most people don't understand, even if they, have heard stories and kind of heard me explain things a lot over time. And I think that's like one of our biggest challenges in music therapy is like we can talk until our face is blue, but unless you're in the room where it happens, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not quite as evident to everybody what
Yeah,
it really
most
means.
certainly. Definitely like the action has so much volume than just explaining it for sure. Yeah,
Hmm.
awesome. I know that you went to Berkeley for grad school. Did
Yes.
you feel like you got to learn a lot more in depth about music therapy? Because I know that like it's like mainly like research based when it comes to master's degree. So what was your
Hmm.
opinion on that?
Yeah, well, I was very interested in specifically going back to get my master's degree in music therapy, because I'd been practicing for a couple of years by that time, and I felt like with every passing year, there was just more and more that I didn't understand about what was happening when I was engaging in music therapy with a client or with a patient. Like I wanted to know so much more about, why is this intervention effective right now? Like why is somebody responding this way when I play the music in this capacity?
Mm-hmm.
And so I really was interested in looking more deeply into like the neuroscientific background behind like how music is processed in the brain and how we better harness the different elements of music as various tools in order to reach those therapeutic outcomes. Um, and so that was a lot of what Berkeley's master's degree was like kind of focused on, was like kind of the neuroscientific background, as well as like integrative medicine and integrative health. And so that was initially what really caught my eye about Berkeley's
Mm-hmm.
degree. And yeah, it was research based. I did my master's thesis. I actually studied the effects of my TEDx talk
Mm-hmm.
on education and advocacy. I really wanted to know whether or not that TEDx talk was helpful,
Mm-hmm.
and actually provided people with knowledge about what music therapy
Yeah.
is.
Oh wow. I know that Kathleen Howland is like neuroscience is her biggest forte.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
I remember taking one of her classes and I was like, oh, what? That's like insane.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and she was and her TEDx talk that she gave was definitely like an inspiration to me. She in her talk she talks a lot more about the neuroscience, and I feel like I have like a basic understanding of a lot of that. But yes, I think learning from her, learning from other people who are really studying like music cognition and all of that is just super fascinating and incredibly helpful as like resources and evidence-based information for our field.
Yeah, I definitely do want to go to grad school soon, but I just don't know when or what to study. Because, like, my mentality is like,
Mm-hmm.
would I want to spend more money in learning the same thing that I majored for my undergrad, or do I want to
Hmm.
study something that I could potentially combine the two, such as like social work,
Mm-hmm.
neuroscience, or like maybe counseling? I don't know. But yeah, I'm still trying to figure it out. But it
Mm-hmm.
seems like the experience that you've encountered of studying music therapy again for your um, for your master's, I think is starting to like kind of change my mentality or like shift in like more insightful ways that maybe this could be an
I like to,
opportunity.
yeah, I like to persuade people.
Well, it's
No,
working.
well, I think, the awesome thing about, I mean, I love to learn, like, the longer that I practice music therapy, and just, live life, the more I recognize that, like, I don't really know anything. And so I'm constantly kind of seeking to learn more and um, advance my practice and skills. But what I love about music therapy is like how versatile it is and how people have the ability to study additional like expertise on top of being a practicing music therapist. And
Hmm.
so whether or not you just want to study more music therapy, great. If you want to focus in on like your counseling skills and really like I that's all of that is super beneficial. And whichever direction you go will be a great
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So I currently work at a mental health hospital and I see the social workers just working their butt offs. Like, and I just like look at them,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like, maybe social work is not gonna be my thing. it get, it gets super intense
It does,
for
yes.
sure. But speaking of like mental health hospital, I know that you used to work there like several years
Yes.
ago. I remember like a couple weeks ago, like I was like actually like really struggling, like burnt out. I started like searching up like psychiatric and music therapy, just to like read some vlogs or like learn some new interventions because I just felt like sometimes there are sessions that just plans out the way how I hoped it to be. Whatever, like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everyone has their own like different definition of what successful session is or that could look like, but for me like things have been like getting like really difficult in a way where like I just like I'm just like lost in words of like how to respond in certain situation that a client or a
Mm.
patient responds because just like what you said in your blog, that patients aren't shy to address things like whether if it's commenting on your musicality skills or or just like the activity or the therapy that you bring in saying that, oh, this is kind of dumb, or like,
Mm-hmm.
why are you talking in that way, or blah 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 blah. Reading your blog has reassured me, and I felt like I just felt like I was typing this myself. Like you were like putting the words for me. And so it just brought so much validation. I just
Well,
appreciate
good.
that. Um, and I'm just curious like what your experience was working at a mental health hospital.
Yeah. Well, you touched on a lot of the feelings that I was feeling for sure. I think um, it is very difficult to work with adults or children or adolescents, anybody within the mental health realm, especially when it's like inpatient behavioral health or psych. And a lot of music therapists are kind of doing that work like individually, like maybe they don't have a lot like a big team, or maybe they only have one other person if they're lucky. And so it's very very easy to feel like you're alone in those feelings and
Mm-hmm.
thoughts or experiences. And so that's one of the main reasons why I was even kind of blogging about my experiences, is because I was in similar situations where I'd be like, okay, I've exhausted all of my ideas for like my sessions this week. Or you had a bunch of patients who were there for repeat admissions, and you're like, well, they've already engaged in this particular session idea with me. Like, I want to have something like fresh and meaningful and intentional for them. And so that was mostly why I was sharing some of my like session ideas, because I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I don't really think these are that good, but like maybe somebody else can take that idea, like a nugget of it, and be like, oh, and then like come up with something for themselves and make it better. And because I think it's really hard to like feel like you have to be constantly creating and innovating and thinking of all of these things when you're by yourself, and it's such a specific population with really specific needs, and so you want to do right by your patients. And that was a lot of what I was feeling during that time. And I wrote a lot of those blog posts like years ago now, and they still seem to be resonating with people. So I'm always happy to hear that.
Yeah, it really does. And I think it just shows that, like, I mean, definitely, like, it's not us, like, we're not the problem, but it's like the system of that I've been noticing. Just like any medical field, like, unfortunately,
all of healthcare.
Yeah, all of healthcare. It's very corrupted in its own ways, and it's unfortunate. This one doctor recently came up to me and was like, "Hey, like, what do you think about this patient? Do you think he or she is ready to go home?" Like, I was like, oh, you want my input? You want my opinion? I was like, what? So I just felt really seen and included with the system, or a part of that treatment team planning. So it's awesome. I mean, there's still, needs to be a lot of work, but, baby steps, like one step at a time. So the whole highlight of this episode, I mean, I'm glad that we got to touch upon mental health, but I'm so curious on how you got the gig of TED Talk, or so if you can share your journey of how that came about and your whole process of that.
Absolutely. So a lot of people ask me that, like, how did you how were you asked, or how did you get involved in being able to do a TEDx talk? And really the simple answer is you can always apply. It's just an application process, and the TEDx like organizations are community based, and so many like institutions or organizations will decide that they want to put one on. So a lot of like universities will do that. And it just so happened to be that one of the universities that was local to where I was living at the time, in Florida, was like going to be hosting a TEDx talk. And my husband saw a flyer and he was like, "You should apply. You should talk about music therapy." And I was like, "What? That's silly." Like, I don't, because in my mind, I was like, oh, TED Talks, like, I'm thinking like the big TED, like, annual invitation. Like, yes, you have to be invited as a speaker. You have to be an expert to speak in those kinds of things. But this community-based one, I was like, actually, maybe that's not a terrible idea. And the timing of all of it was that I had like just started the graduate program at Berkeley. I was in this cohort full of people who have done amazing things in music therapy, and were just like super inspirational. And I have like a competitive nature when it comes to things like that. So I used like the inspiration of my cohort and was like, I want to do something. And so, and I love to give presentations. I've been doing them throughout my career. I kind of was like thrown into rather formal presentations, like right from the start. But one of the reasons why I love to present is like I have like a history of like, being in theater when I was a kid. So I was like, yeah, put me up on a stage. Like, I will happily talk about something. And so, yeah, the TEDx talk, I just applied, and I initially, I had to provide a title for some reason to my TEDx talk before, like as a part of my application process, which is kind of bizarre because at least I don't ever have a title for things until I create the content. And I thought to myself, well, I don't know what I'm going to talk about, but I know I'm going to talk about music therapy. So I went with the title, Why I Want to Change the World with Music Therapy, which is like the loftiest title ever. And I really don't think that my TEDx talk talks about that at all, or doesn't really like encompass that title, other than the fact that I really wanted to gear it towards just like providing the best definition of music therapy that I could provide. within my allotted 15-minute time.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, I feel like your title does resonate to what you spoke about, though. No, seriously.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, because there was a quote, or there was something that you said. I even like wrote it down on my phone because I really liked it. So you said, not only working towards seeking acceptance in music therapy, but actively seeking for music therapy. Whoa, that literally changed my whole perceptions of like the way how I want to approach music therapy now, or approach others. Because just like how I mentioned before, I just felt like I wasn't being seen or like been taken seriously at my workplace, because I like other providers call me, hey, music girl, or like, hey, guitar girl. And I'm just like, I'm a music therapist. like, you know, that elevator talk that we always had to practice, you know? And so I always have it right on that script, ready to tell them that like, hey, I'm not just a guitar music girl, I am blah 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 blah. But when you mention about just others just actively wanting to seek us, like, that definitely changed my point of view of the way how like I want to approach things, or like even advocate music therapy.
Yeah.
So I seriously live by that's like amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's also like other things that you mentioned in your TEDx, like music is one of the longest standing self-prescribed therapies in history, and that music is everywhere we go, which is so true. One thing that I always include at the end of my every sessions is that if words were perfect, then there would be no music. And this is where like I would go back, like even like back in way back in history, a lot of people didn't have a voice to speak up for themselves, and so this is where music came into place, substitute those words but with music, just to get whatever they wanted to address.
Yeah, I love that.
Also, when you mention about how music is more than magical, it's a part of our human nature. Our bodies are naturally musical, such as like rhythmic breath, movement, and heartbeat. And I never thought of it as like that. And so when you were like typing that, like what was like going through your thoughts?
Yeah. So I can't remember everything, but like when I think back to that statement, I was really thinking about like the neuroscientific phenomenon of entrainment, which I briefly mentioned in my TEDx talk, and I've like come to learn so much more about entrainment since then. And so I think like in a way, like I wanted to convey at the time that, because it was so much of like what I was like knee deep in learning at the time, was like I felt studying my undergrad degree that I was just learning that music was like, if you saw this scenario with a client, then use this intervention, or like use an intervention like this to address this. And I was like, okay, great. And so then I would go out and I'd be like, all right, here's all the interventions that I know. Here's the scenario. I'm going to apply these interventions. Cool. And then I'd have these moments that I would be like, what is happening? Like, because it felt like magic in a way. And because I didn't understand. I was like, but what, like, why is this happening? And so I get those, you would get these comments from like families and clients themselves, and they'll say things like, oh, like it really, like, that really moved me, or that was just like so magical that like now this client who had a stroke can like walk on to the beat of your music. And so yes, absolutely, so many components of it are really magical. But there's also neuroscientific reasonings for why these things are working. And so being able to kind of like loop it back to things that people can easily understand, of like, oh yes, my heartbeat is rhythmic in nature. Yeah. Like it is music on its own. And so it's kind of twofold because I believe there is like a very deep dichotomy between like the power of music as it stands in like a spiritual and ethereal and magical sense.
Yeah.
And then there's the power of music in the very scientific and clinical and, adaptive way that we can harness it as a tool.
Yeah. So, in your own words, what would you say your philosophy of music therapy
Hmm.
is?
So I know we ask these questions of like interns and students and new professionals and all of that. And I honestly feel like the deeper I get into music therapy, the less I can answer that question. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I do continue to seek to learn and try new things and continue to like better myself as a clinician. And so I don't know if I can answer your
No,
question
it's
of like a
fine.
philosophy of music or philosophy of music therapy because I think that it's sometimes easier to respond to like what my approaches
Mm-hmm.
are and kind of like how I engage in the day to
Yeah.
day and and um, even by saying like what is your approach to music therapy is also hard for me to answer because I feel like I'm just constantly adapting
Yeah.
my approaches to
Mm-hmm.
really meet the different the needs, especially in a hospital setting. I really bounce back and forth
Mm-hmm.
between different units and populations and needs, and so what I'm going to provide to a baby in the NICU is going to look very different to how I'm going to approach, an end of life
Right.
situation, or working with a teenager who has more like rehab based goals. Um, but I will say that I think most of my approach is just boiled down to being, person centered, like humanistic, strengths based. I'm learning more and more every day about like really what trauma informed care really is, especially working with babies and families in the NICU. And so I would like to say that my approach is
Mm-hmm.
eclectic, but I think there are too many approaches and there are many approaches I do not use. So I don't know if I can truly say I'm eclectic either.
Yeah.
So really, I'm just a terrible example for
No.
answering your classic questions of what is your philosophy of music therapy and your approach.
Honestly, like you've been working so many different populations and you're so right about it's just like really like depends on like who you're working with, like you said, like adolescent to
Mm-hmm.
NICU or like to end of life.
Mm-hmm.
It's just different. Yeah. And so in your own words, how does music benefit our mental health?
Music is so central to many, many people. I can't say everybody, but for many people, it is so central to like who they are, how they identify themselves, and it's so accessible
Mm-hmm.
that that is one of the things that I think is most important about like how it affects our mental health is that like we can access music at our fingertips and kind of regardless of your like background, your culture, your socioeconomic status, your like there is music somewhere for everybody.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of evidence based information, scientific reasons why it helps and affects our mental health. But that's kind of what I've been sitting with the most recently is just how accessible it is. A lot of what I do provide to try to better mental health is like education about why it's important to be intentional with our
Mm-hmm.
music
Yeah.
usage and to not allow music to exacerbate like ruminations and things like that. So I think there's a lot of like psychoeducation that can come with like how we use music and like helping people become aware of that. But if you can provide that education to people, again, the accessibility is there for so many that that's like ultimately where I really think positive change towards, you know, positive mental health can be addressed by music.
Right. Yeah. Music is most certainly universal. I think that's one of music's like superpower, how it just has the ability to touch every soul, no matter like what background or culture, age, race, or, you know, like there's something about music that allows people to come together. Like we like my hospital, it's very diverse, and it's pretty crazy of how many times I've witnessed music presenting its power like that, where even just like fully Spanish speakers or etc. Like of course, like I provide them like lyrics, be prepared, so that they can also like participate and follow along. But I see them sometimes like not using the lyric sheet that I hand out or that I've like transcribed for them. And I'm just like, oh wow, like I feel like music has its way to like really understand where everyone's coming from through that. I don't know how to put into words, but it's just cool witnessing that from my own lens. And also when you mention about how accessible it is, but also like I think in one of your blogs you mentioned about how like music can be also dangerous.
Yes. And that's kind of like a lot of where that like education comes into play. People can have coping skills that are either positive or negative, right? They could be positive for somebody and negative for someone else. And so people could be using music in their life to fuel those more negative mood states, right? Like you're like, I'm really angry right now, and then you're just like listening to music that continues to like keep you in that place, rather than having an opportunity to like let the music get you out of that space. And like, you know, I'll be the first person to say, yes, listen to the music that validates how you're feeling right now. That's great. That's okay. And I want that. But I also want you to use the music to help you move forward. And so I'm not saying I want you to go from angry to like, you know, totally like happy-go-lucky, because that is going to dismiss everything that you're feeling. Right. But we can gradually work to that space, and have that be a more positive coping mechanism for sure. And you know, that like for us as music therapists, like that's the ISO principle, right? So just like sitting with people in where they're at, emotionally, mentally, even physically, and helping gradually move them to that more positive mood state, or wherever it is that would be beneficial.
Yeah, for sure. Like when I never thought that like music could be dangerous until I started working at a mental health hospital, of how like words or phrases could be very triggering to those who have encountered something very traumatic. And if it's not used, like you said, like not used correctly or processed correctly, then it could feel like they're kind of stuck, not knowing what to do with their emotions in the moment. And so actually something like today happened where there's this song that I like to use called Tell Your Heart to Beat Again by Danny Goki. And I use a lot of that like for lyric analysis. But that song is definitely not easy to listen to, because it really hits hardcore to the center of our pain. And so I always like process and do extra processing with patients during my group of that. But then I saw like patients like writing down song requests that they give into their text, and someone requested that song, and I honestly like got a little worried, because like that's, like I said, like it's not an easy song to listen to. And I was like, oh, like how are you all like feeling after listening to this, like blah blah blah. And they were like, oh, it's heavy. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna come back tomorrow and then we'll process it more and etc. But yeah, it could be very dangerous.
Not everybody is naturally aware of those things. Even like, half of the population doesn't even listen to lyrics, right? Like, that's one of my first questions when I ask people if I'm like going to be specifically processing a song with them. I was like, when you first hear a song, do you hear the words or do you hear the music? And, sometimes people aren't even aware of the lyrics at all because that's not what they're listening to, which is fine. But like just even knowing that detail right there is something that you can help people be more aware of and learn from. And again, going back to that intentionality of, why am I using this music and how could I use this music differently to feel better?
For sure. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I definitely do want to ask you just one more question about your TEDx talk.
Sure.
So like as you said, like your title was, I want to change the world with music therapy. And so like, if you were to think like today's time, like what is it that you think that needs to be changed or developed in the music therapy industry? Or like, what is it that us music therapists, like this new generation, that we can contribute to continue developing or advocating music therapy even stronger?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I really wish that I had like a very straightforward answer, because then there would be like, oh, here's the like, the puzzle piece to the career. I feel like I have already noticed a significant change in even just like the last 5 years, and maybe it's just my own awareness, or maybe it's actually what is occurring, but I feel like the newer generation of music therapists and like music therapy students even are coming in and really utilizing like social media and networks in a way that I don't have the capacity for, and are just very generally spreading awareness, and things as simple as like, here's some facts, here's some definitions, here's some like quotes, and like all sorts of things. And I think that is just like such a good use of like tools that come really naturally to them. So I feel like that is already like such a great advocacy route to be taking, and so I feel excited when I see these things, because I'll like, come across something on Instagram and be like, oh, this is great. And then it'll be like, the person's profile is like music therapy student. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they're not even a professional yet. And look at them. And so I think that is all awesome. But I also feel like our profession has really like been around for many decades. And so I feel like I can already see different generations responding to being integrated into the healthcare systems in a very different way than their predecessors. And that is because their predecessors have done all of that work to allow music therapists to be in a space now where like I don't have to tell every single person that I come across in the hallway anymore like who I am. Right. And, people will still ask me, of course, but like seeing a person with a guitar in a hospital does not seem to have people like blink their eyes in shock and awe in the same way that it did even like 10 years ago. And again, this might just be my own perception. But I feel like previous generations spent their whole careers defending their work. And I don't think that music therapy is in that same place anymore. I don't think people have to defend themselves anymore. They're sitting at the table. Yeah. They might have put themselves there. Maybe they weren't invited, but they're there. Yeah. And so now like newer generations have the opportunity to really spend less energy defending and more energy advocating and educating and demonstrating. Yeah.
Wow, that was so good. Music therapist. Yeah, we're definitely sitting at the table, whether invited or not.
Yes. And in many cases they were invited, which is huge. Yeah. And that's a big change. And I think it's great. We just continue to move onward and upward.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. You have brought nothing but bunch of insights throughout this whole conversation that we've been having.
Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I just really appreciate your time and just like sharing about, your work and your journey as a music therapist. You're definitely changing the world, and you definitely have minions like me who are following your footsteps.
Oh gosh. That makes me nervous, but
yeah,
I guess it's good.
Yeah, it was such an honor just like talking to you about like, just two
Thank
people
you.
drinking coffee together virtually at a cafe.
Yes.
Just talking about what we're really passionate about, and it feels so, so good. So I just really appreciate your time and just wanting to, be on this podcast. So
Well, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate being here.
yeah, of course. Yeah, we'll definitely have more conversations later in the future for sure. So
Sounds great.
well, everyone, thank you so much for hopping on and tuning in and just, grabbing coffee with us and just learning more about music therapy. Those of you who aren't a music therapist and was listening to our whole conversation, I hope you got a glimpse of what we do and what music therapy is. But those of you who are a music therapist, I hope this has brought you insights. Those of you who work at a mental health hospital or not, just like, more glimpse about music therapy with obviously the greatest guest that we have here today. But yeah, once again, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to leave a comment below in our ratings. Yeah, so see you all next time. Bye.